On BBC Two, it's 2 seconds to midnight. This highly unusual film from the BBC's Natural History Unit mirrors a journey through the Earth's evolution to the point where man confronts nature and searches for a more harmonious attitude towards our planet.
This is a story of the Earth. From 4.6 billion years ago to 50 years in the future. If the Earth's history was one day, humans would appear at 2 seconds to midnight. To transform the planet. Over billions of years, the Earth changed from a lifeless molten mass to a living world, then a human-dominated one. So, what forces drive the planet? How much has changed in that last 2 seconds? How can humans regain a balance in the future? The first step towards life was the greenhouse effect, created by carbon dioxide in the primitive atmosphere. It warmed ice into water. The passage of the moon created tides, the source of turbulence and change. In this dynamic world, large molecules form, only to be smashed by harsh ultraviolet sunlight. Or by lightning bolts. Away from the light, molten rock spewed chemicals into the mix. Over millions of years, the huge improbability of life became a clear probability, with chlorophyll and DNA as its base. The biological world began with bacteria, simply DNA strands inside a cell wall. The DNA splits to form each new bacterium, producing thousands of generations. Cyanobacteria also contain chlorophyll, but 6 hours of our Earth day passed before the dawn was greeted by cells that harness sunlight. They excreted oxygen, depositing the iron salts in the water. Over millions of years, microbes turned the seas blue. The oxygen from algae created a new atmosphere. Now, ultraviolet light was shielded by an ozone layer 80 kilometers up. Chlorophyll is the energy transformer that supports all life, so animals need plants. Eating them is simply a fast way of gaining that energy. All life forms were single cells in 3 basic designs for 14 hours of our Earth day. At 8 p.m., there was a quantum leap. Cells started dividing into forms with different cell mixes. The potential diversity was limitless. A massive expansion in species began. Even marine living blobs came in a huge variety of shapes, sizes, and lifestyles. At 9:20 p.m., there was a new body plan. Trilobites had a strong, light, flexible shell supported by efficient, jointed legs. Their group, the arthropods, became the most varied on Earth. It was 950 before plants colonized the land, benefiting from stronger sunlight, increased carbon dioxide, and freedom from plant eaters. The animals soon followed, with the arthropods leading. Adapting their body shape for land presented no problems. Insects are ideal colonizers. Their larval and adult stages can even live in separate habitats. Their lightweight exoskeleton is perfect for water, land, and air. An ecological rule controlled their expansion. Plants can only feed a limited number of herbivores, plant eaters. The herbivores carry an even smaller number of carnivores. If the mantids outnumber the caterpillars, the system collapses. Each level has what is called a carrying capacity. The only way to expand it is to increase the area of the system. Ants do that by foraging. At 10 p.m. on our Earth Day, the first backboned animals crawled onto land. Adapting a bone skeleton took a long time. Replacing the buoyancy of water, providing support on land, developing lungs to take over from gills. Even then, fish still return to the water to breathe. By 10:30, plant life was lush. Photosynthesis produced a carbon cycle, taking in carbon dioxide and storing it as wood to be released by fungi once the tree died. In the swamps, many trees were buried before they could rot, storing billions of tons of carbon underground. Eventually, it would form coal. As the millennia passed, the continents drifted, the climate and weather patterns changed. By 11 p.m. on our Earth Day, the vertebrates were spread across the land, adapted for a wide range of niches. Big herbivores like Diplodocus weighed 10 tons and measured 27 meters from head to tail. Whilst most reptiles lumbered around with feet splayed out to the side, dinosaurs supported their weight on straight legs. Which meant some could walk on their hind legs alone. The bipedal dinosaurs were brilliantly designed, fast-moving hunters. They topped a complex food chain that built up from plants, through insects, to small mammals. Things were also changing at the bottom of the pile, as flowering plants joined the ferns and pines. Helped by a new relationship with animals, they spread across the world. 11:40 p.m. and a lakeside nest in North America. Dinosaurs had reached new levels of sophistication. Hadrosaurs like these nested in colonies, communicated using sound, and cared for their young. They had ruled the planet for 100 million years, and then The dinosaur extinction was a natural event. It provided new opportunities. Throughout the dinosaur age, mammals remained hidden, small nocturnal insect eaters. When the dinosaurs died out, the mammals took over. They are perfectly adapted to exploiting change. Warm-blooded, so they can live almost anywhere. Fast breeding, but looking after their young. And with food demands 1/10,000th of a dinosaur's. Mammals expanded into all the niches left by the reptiles. By 1148 on our Earth Day, bats were hunting for flying insects. Four minutes later, there were 10-meter-long baleen whales sifting for fish and crustaceans. The last few seconds of our day, and the rules of the planet are established. The Earth supports an array of species, adapting to change by evolution. The tactics are long established. Attack the weakest prey, scavenge carrion, open up new niches, save energy and invest it in breeding. The forests, lakes, rivers and wetlands were as they are now. Each one has a natural population control in the carrying capacity of the habitat and each level of the food chain. Life would have continued like this until now, but for one thing. The human subspecies first appeared in Africa around 100,000 years ago. An omnivore that could harvest wild plants or hunt large prey using weapons and teamwork. "40,000 years ago, the humans had reached Europe, hunting reindeer and avoiding the risk of injury by stampeding them over cliffs. Animal predators picked off the old and the weak. The human hunters wiped out the strongest animals as they led their herds to destruction. True overkill. A large, complex brain meant that humans could now adapt to change immediately by evolving behavior. Learning and experience were inherited as well as genes. As the Earth's human population rose to 100,000, one casualty was our nearest relative. After 10,000 years of coexistence, Neanderthal man became extinct, the loser in an evolutionary intelligence test. The planet was locked in ice. The northern latitudes were recolonized just 15,000 years ago. Even now, Europe and North America have far fewer species than the tropics, which changed and developed over millions of years. During the Ice Age, the sea level dropped by 80 meters, and humans walked from Asia into the Americas. In the rich American rainforests, there were plants with nerve poisons, developed as a defense against the myriad insects. Adding distilled plant toxins to their armory, humans attacked species that were safe from animal predators and drove them to extinction. Rainforest plants also produce fruit to attract monkeys, bats, and birds, which then disperse the seeds in their droppings. Humans were part of this community of plants and animals with its mix of conflict, protection, and exploitation. Rainforest species are very diverse, but spread out over wide areas. Planting a crop in a clearing or keeping animals in a village overcame the problem. The clearings were small and lasted just one growing season. The crops were forest plants. Growing them was easier than searching for wild food. Enter a new type of human, the farmer. Rainforest scavengers were the easiest animals for humans to control. 10,000 years ago, jungle fowl and their eggs fed the villagers of Southeast Asia. Forest pigs were domesticated by a reliable supply of scraps. With a protected food supply, the human population reached 4 million. On the riverbanks of the Middle East, animal muscle power took arable farming into a new era, with new plant strains, irrigation, and ploughed fields. Plants formed 70% of the diet. The human's low position on the food chain meant a large carrying capacity. Long hours of hard work by farmers now supported soldiers, scribes, priests, and emperors, with a different view of nature. Rome became the center of European civilization, but across the planet, humans had developed into a wide diversity of cultures. In the 13th century, China was the most technological civilization on Earth. Its farmers had floating dams that deposited rich silt onto the fields as natural fertilizer. The Chinese invented the iron plow and printed manuals of philosophy. In Central America, slash-and-burn farmers had become sophisticated agriculturalists. The Mayans supported 2,000 people on each square mile of poor soil. Maize was the mainstay of a varied diet, grown on terraces to prevent soil erosion. They protected their plants by intercropping and protected the soil by crop rotation. But 1,200 years ago, the civilization collapsed. After a millennium of expansion, the farmers had overstretched the carrying capacity of their lands and broken the law of ecology. In the Andes, the Incas were more successful. Standing 2,000 feet above sea level, Machu Picchu was part of an empire covering modern Bolivia and Peru, linked by paved roads. Inca farmers were the masters of agriculture on marginal lands. 500 years ago, they supported a population of 16 million. But a new type of human was heading their way. The conquistadors believed their mastery should be of the entire world. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI declared that half the world belonged to Portugal and half to Spain, as of course he assumed was his right. For the Aztecs of Mexico, this meant genocide. 140,000 people lived in the city of Tenochtitlan. In 1521, it was razed to the ground. In 1520, there were 25 million Aztecs. By 1600, there were just 1 million left. Human diversity was declining under the weight of the cross. This destruction was not just about culture and religion, or even greed. The European population had increased steadily to 100 million. It needed more resources. The population was centered in towns, most of which were overcrowded and polluted. The wealth of towns drew raw materials from the countryside. Sheep replaced food crops as England became the world leader in wool. "14 million sheep turned the downs into pasture, but brought little benefit to the rural population. Wood was the universal building material. Each new house took 12 trees. Oak woodland supports a huge range of plants and animals. It's one of the richest northern habitats. By the end of the 17th century, nearly all the medieval forests of England had been felled, with no replanting. A big oak could weigh 2 tons, but half that weight would be lost turning it into timber. A ship of the line took 6,000 loads of timber. Each one was over a ton. With the loss in processing, a ship like HMS Victory could take 1,300 tons of oak. The Victory was built with English oak, elm and fir, and Danzig oak from Poland. By 1775, the American colonies had already been stripped of tall pines suitable for masts. The deforestation we now see in rainforests happened first in Europe. And it's been happening in Brazil since the 17th century. After logging came plantations producing sugar, coffee and cocoa for the European luxury market. Biological diversity became monoculture. Local plants and animals became weeds and pests. Yet plantations are always vulnerable to nature. The simpler temperate forests of North America were easier for the Europeans. They were just like the Europe now destroyed, but much bigger. The time was ripe for war. Once the British had removed the French from Canada, the focus moved to America.
Pick and pride. Pick ready. Fire.
Here, the colonialists fought back, defending a huge resource base from British taxation.
Polio, balance. Right about. Base. Run, march. Fire. Fire.
Having won their country, The new Americans set about exploiting it. Sea otters, beavers, fox and seals came within their sights. They were decimated for the fur trade by the new conquistadors. There were 5 billion passenger pigeons in North America when the Europeans arrived. They bred in New England and flew south each autumn, gathering in huge flocks. Pigeons were easy meat. A single county in Michigan slaughtered 7.5 million birds in one season. The fall from billions to extinction in the wild took less than 100 years. "60 million buffalo roamed the plains in 1830, free-ranging, natural, harvestable meat. By the end of the century, they numbered only thousands. After the conquistadors came the mechanics, intent on harnessing the energy of the earth for human use. Watermills were amongst the earliest energy converters, starting the industrialization of the planet rolling. Rivers are a very reliable source of strong motive power that can be channeled using cogs and belts. Watermills were first used to grind corn and other cereals. There were 5,000 listed in the Doomsday Book. As mechanization increased, water power was used to drive machines for sawing wood, making paper or hammering metal in forges, to make tools for the mechanics. Harnessing the power of the wind moved energy generation away from rivers. Windmills allowed local food processing, adding value to crops. A 19th century windmill could grind up to 150 kilograms of grain per hour. But there's only one way to directly tap the sun's energy, and it's billions of years old. The photochemical process within plant chlorophyll. It builds carbon dioxide gas into sugars and finally cellulose, the basis of wood. Burning wood releases the energy that was once sunlight as heat and light. It's a good fuel, transportable but heavy and in demand for timber. It's the water in wood that gives it weight. Packed tightly so it burns with little oxygen, the wood is purified to dry carbon. Light, portable, charcoal. Building the charcoal mound on a woodland hearth takes about a day. It will burn for 3. Charcoal fueled the iron industry. A blast furnace consumed 750 acres of trees a year. By 1690, the wood was running out. In America, forests stretch from New York to the Mississippi, enough to provide the fuel and building materials for the American Industrial Revolution. As the machines crossed the states, the trees came down. A steam engine burned a ton of wood every 12 miles. The track it ran on took more. Forests were decimated to feed the iron horse. In 1860, the railroad stretched 53,000 miles and used almost 500 million cubic feet of wood. In Europe, the trees had already gone to build workshops and warships. A new form of carbon energy was needed, and it was found deep underground. The compressed trees of the great Carboniferous forests now existed as coal. Coal burning released tons of carbon dioxide gas and produced acid rain, but it sidestepped an energy crisis. Steam engines appeared in every factory. They worked round the clock, and there was plenty of cheap labor to serve them. Coal even provided gas, a light, to lengthen the working day. 170 years ago, humans made the Earth unique. Even when it faced away from the sun, it gave off light. Peppered moths existed in two forms, black and white, but as the grime increased, the white ones lost the advantage of camouflage. Within 50 years, 95% of moths were the black form. They could merge with the industrial grime. If the conquistadors believed man should dominate nature, the mechanics provided the tools to move humans beyond natural law. Mechanized farming increased human use of the carrying capacity. And stimulated population growth. The British population doubled in 50 years. Then 50% more land was taken by farms. In America, the traditional lands of the Native Americans were being opened up. A natural source of meat was replaced by domestic cattle, animals a white man could manage, and a Sioux couldn't hunt. Humans were climbing the food chain in millions. The mechanization of the North created a huge demand for cheap raw materials. The British took over India. They built railways, roads, ports, and a civil service to cream off 40% of India's timber, minerals, spices, cotton. Plantations changed habitats around the world, creating wealth for colonial powers. The Victorian lady could wear materials from all over the world, from silk to whalebone. Her damage to the environment was suffered by someone else. The Victorians created a culture of manufacturing powered by cheap fossil fuels, of worldwide consumption. and of transport as the key to success. This is the legacy of the mechanics. The transport revolution had an enormous impact on some wild animals. With smoking and freezing, it increased the market for fish, the last great wild hunt. Around the British coast, mackerel, herring, cod and plaice came under pressure. Understanding the dynamics of a wild population is much more difficult than harvesting a crop. Fortunately, fish breed in huge numbers and mature quickly. Sailing further from their home ports, the latter-day conquistadors could always find new ground. But by 1890, plaice was locally extinct, and by the 1920s, the herring fishery was in terminal decline. Whales are the worst kind of crop. 40 million years without serious predators meant they bred very slowly to match the death rate. Whalers killed 3,000 right whales a year for meat, whalebone bristles, and most importantly, oil. But just as a whale oil crisis threatened to fundamentally change fuel use, it was sidestepped by a steam pump in the woodlands of Pennsylvania. Like coal, oil is a store of impure carbon locked up outside the carbon cycle. Crude oil is a mixture containing fuel oil for burning, light oil and gases for lighting. But the greatest light show was to come. Electricity is atomic energy, the effect of excited electrons. To harness it was an amazing achievement. Electricity drives every cell, from algae to the human brain. But it can only be produced from other energy forms, from the breakdown of food in animals, the movement of turbines by water, or the burning of coal or oil. If Edison had invented a solar panel to power the bulb, the world would be a very different place. As it was, coal bore the brunt, and with each ton burnt came more air pollution. The 20th century dawned with the human race in another jam. Over 1 million horses lived in London alone, distributing goods and bringing raw materials from the countryside. Transport was vital to city life, and horses were inadequate. Internal combustion was a revelation. The horse was replaced by a small, tireless explosion chamber that drove 16 miles on 1 gallon of fuel. There was a lot of smoke, but that didn't matter. Oil became the key fuel. Keeping it cheap for everyone was vital. In 1914, 80% of London's goods traffic was still horse-drawn. Elsewhere, technological change was faster. The First World War pitched human life against high explosive. 8.5 million soldiers died. With a ground war fed with human flesh, the petrol engines had new uses in aircraft and tanks. the world would never be the same. The war machine was turned to domestic production, and the car gave people freedom to go where they liked. World War II was a fast-moving techno-war. Oil was a target, science was a weapon. U-boats exposed the British Empire's global carrying capacity. American fleets crossed the Pacific. Europeans fought in jungles. Bombing killed 40,000 people in Hamburg. And the war ended with a demonstration of human science. For the first time, the atmosphere had a new component, strontium-90. Science had ended the war. It was the modern panacea. Nuclear power generation was pushed forward in the 50s. It came with added Cold War deterrent value, and the waste was hidden away. Radiation is fundamental and literally universal, with a timescale to match. 40 years on, the prospect of waste that will be dangerous for 25,000 years is daunting. Most nuclear stations are already looking dated. Nuclear power was on stream before we knew how to handle the waste. Wartime science transformed post-war society, producing plastics, pharmaceuticals, and pesticides. Plastics are very useful materials, but totally unnatural, new to the planet, and immune to its decaying effects. Europeans fighting a jungle war needed help from the chemists. Pesticides fought the malarial mosquitoes. They were as dangerous as enemy action. DDT is a powerful poison. Very effective against insects, it turned out to be carcinogenic in humans. Pesticide production has increased to 30 times the 1945 level, but only 10% reaches its target. In the long term, pesticides will fail. 25 of the 36 species of cotton pests are now immune to DDT. Attacking a biological problem with chemicals simply puts resilient, fast-breeding species under a new selection pressure, which stimulates evolution. Eventually, immunity is bound to develop, and the final casualties may be bird and mammal predators at the top of the food chain. Modern agriculture is chemical-based, high input, high impact. Farmers now cultivate 11% of the Earth's surface to feed a new type of human, the consumer. Agriculture is the reverse of evolution. It has reduced the range of species until 90% of human food comes from just 20 species of plant.